like 6 months notice, and because we're very ambitious, we said for sure. And then we also said, now that we have this concept, what's really going on here? And we realized that there's this beautiful contrast between how humans move, how robots move, but specifically around labor and work. And so we said, we're gonna do this as an endurance performance, and I'll dance with a robot for 8 hours straight. And that will be our commentary and our reimagining of the American workday. How many people in this room have danced with a robot for 8 hours straight? Yeah, and I can tell you that I think we set the Guinness World Record for it. It's under submission, but we're waiting to find out whether it's a yay or a nay. And so now that we had this idea that I'm gonna dance with a robot for 8 hours straight, and sure enough, to all of our roboticists and everybody who's gonna sit there and work with the robot for 8 hours straight, we got written up in the New York Times, so they highlighted this for their kind of winter preview. This was last year. And what did we want to do with those 8 hours of potential human and robot motion? We decided to fill it with all of these different kinds of labor and work. So we looked at motions like stirring, or changing a light bulb, wiping a mirror, painting a wall, moving a pallet, sweeping a floor. And we saw this exaltation of the beauty of capability, of how broad-ranging the human body can be, how expressive, that we can do so many different kinds of motions. And now can we give a robot the capability of doing these same kinds of motions? Of course, this was very controversial because everyone, when they comes to robots, they always ask, when is the robot coming for my job? So non-roboticists have this major fear about robots taking over and coming for all of our jobs. Of course, this has been shown in many different forms of media. And Ken and I are inviting people to consider the possibility that there's a much broader future with humans and robots. And so then we started looking at the history of labor and how humans move in labor. This was some industrial kind of turn of the century. People were studying how humans labor, these time and motion studies. This is early motion capture. We can see how do they actually move through space to accomplish different kinds of tasks? How can they do that more efficiently? Marcel Duchamp, so different painters who are being able to capture these kinds of time and motion studies, and of course through images as well. So there's always been this deep fascination with how to do work more efficiently. Finally, a couple of definitions here. So we then wanted to construct this 8-hour piece. And so we came up with a motif, which all that is it's a series of motions. And that's either motions that are stirring, or they've been guided through open pose, or we've programmed them directly with sinusoids, or I've moved them around in teach mode. So we would have a block, a series of different motions we could choose from. This 0G teach mode is just when the robot is fully compliant. We can record the motion that the robot's doing or not, so we can simply have it be compliant during that series. And then force mode is when it's partially compliant, and the gripper will react to the forces that you provided the gripper. So then, in order to create a main performance, we then needed to sequence all of these different motifs together. And as a choreographer and as artists, you always want to be moving pieces around. So we needed, Ethan and Treya wrote this software that was very flexible, so we could slot things and change the order of what we're doing at all times. We had a very simple state machine, which is moving from motif A to motif B. We've got a collision checker that says, does this final joint angle, is it going to wrist collide with the first joint angle of the next section, yes or no? And if we need to, we can interpolate, and if we don't, then we can just keep going and do it and do it. Or if we need to, we can flip the wrist and make sure everything's fine, and if we don't, we'll interpolate and go straight into motif B. So this is kind of what things look like during the show. I did not memorize 8 hours worth of motions, and so we had these slides that were playing alongside, so I was getting cues. I got pretty close to memorizing the whole thing. And this is a sample of what it looked like at National Sawdust last year. This is a motion that has been extracted from open pose, is what the robot is currently doing, and then I'm following alongside. That's one of the motifs. And then this is a very different part of the show, where we were kind of trading motions off back and forth. So I would move, and then the robot would move, and we would inherit motions from each other. You can see Ken, Ethan, and Treya off to the right. They had their hands on the e-stop the whole time, making sure that nobody got harmed, because we did all kinds of things with this robot that you're not typically supposed to do. Okay, and now I want to zoom out a little bit, now that we've talked about Breathless, and really speak about our future with choreography and robots. The main difference between a robot and a computer is that a robot moves. Full stop. Choreography is to robotics what user experience is to computers. When you took a computer out of a research lab, out of a military facility, and you stuck it in somebody's house, all of a sudden you needed linguistics, semiotics, psychology. That is where human-computer interaction showed up. It's because all of a sudden now you have billions of people who are using these devices, and not just a rarefied few hundred or thousand. And we're doing the same thing with robotics. We're taking robots out of the factory, out of the military facility, and we're sticking them in people's homes and hospitals. If I'm 75 years old, I have no interest in learning how to teleoperate a robot or program a computer. All I want to do is move and talk. And if I want to do that, I need choreography. And this is where choreographers and roboticists actually have been working on similar problems for a very long time. And so if you want the motion of a robot to express anything, to be meaningful in any way, whether it's concern, care, urgency, love, loathing, etc., you call a choreographer. And interestingly, I just had a conversation with Tom Sheep early at Waymo, where he was like, I've been talking about robot choreography since 2010 because I needed to get a robot to drive in a way that people felt safe. People felt empowered, they felt inspired. And this is truly where Choreorobotics, I believe, will be the difference maker between a few million robots that do fine things or a billion robots that people actually care about and want to be around. And this is the game changer. This is the table stakes for the next several decades. We all want robots out in the environment of the world. This will be part of what contributes to making that reality possible. So choreographers have to describe and translate motion through scores, teaching, and recording, right? They have all these different ways of being able to describe motion. Roboticists do the exact same thing. They just do it through software and equations. Same problem, two different approaches. Roboticists and choreographers also need to allow room for uncertainty. Right now we have these black boxes of kind of end-to-end learning or state machines. Choreographers deal with the exact same thing, thinking about these things in performance, how you can create actual malleable performance where these different states can transition back and forth. Similarly, choreographers and roboticists rely upon cues and patterns to convey legibility and intent. I would guess that most people in this room have never seen this ballet, but you can gather from the fact that she's red, she's high, and her fingers are outstretched that she's important, and everybody else is in white. Right? So nobody needs to have seen this, we just already have a strong belief about what it means. And this is kind of a canonical paper from Anka Dragan in her PhD work where she showed that legible motion is not necessarily the same as predictable or functional. So depending on your goal, you will have very different sets of movements that will get you there. And you need to rely upon these existing cues that people have around legibility and intent and be aware of them, because if you're not, you're bound to get in trouble. Finally, roboticists and choreographers need methods that generate new motion from scratch. We tend to optimize for things in robotics like time efficiency or energy efficiency. But what if instead we said, let's make as many different motions as we want. Let's make a huge diverse design space of motions and then pick the ones that we actually desire. Or optimize for something else that isn't just power or speed. This is the same problem that choreographers have. This is why choreographers come up with all crazy different ways of generating motion from scratch. And finally, I think the core of all this is what kinds of experiences can we create that leverage a robot's capabilities as both a utilitarian tool and an evocative social agent, because they are always both. All movement is impactful to humans. We used to get eaten, we used to be chased around by other big mammals, and so there are tons of research studies out there that even if you have random collections of black moving dots or small pieces of shapes moving around a screen, humans tell stories about the movement. They say that they're moving from left to right, that they feel sad, that they remind them of sitting under a tree in the wind, and so you always have some kind of story that you're telling about the motion, and it's our job as roboticists to make sure that the story is the story that we actually want. And I won't have time to talk about this because we're low on time, but I've investigated these things for quite a while. When I was an artist in residence, for example, at places like Everyday Robots, where we were able, we're gonna have to get through these slides really quickly. I don't know how to make it advance. Okay, I'll just keep clicking. I'm gonna keep, these are, okay. Anyway, I've been investigating these things for quite some time because I think they're so truly important to how we're gonna live our lives with robots. If you wanna learn more about this project, that I am not now going to talk about. You can watch my TED Talk from April. And then let me quickly hop through the rest of these. Essentially that we got some really incredible reactions. Oh, and two quick plugs. The brand new Stanford Robotics Center has a dance studio in it. This is how serious the future of Choreorobotics is coming to unfold. It is what I think the first ever robotics lab that has a dance studio built inside of the lab with a sprung wood floor and mirrors. And then, of course, there are tons of interesting people who are doing work in this space aside from myself. And one of the things that I am building is a 9-foot-high robotic hand at the Exploratorium. So if you want to learn about more of any of these things, come to our show tonight, 7:30. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
People must have questions.
Okay.
So if we can get some help with the chairs and just reshuffle the stage for the next panel, then yeah, who has questions?
So one thing while we're waiting is I hadn't heard you talk about driving as choreography before, but I really like that because if you think about it, it's kind of improv, right? When we get out there, you're driving with a lot of other people, there is this idea of like a good driver who is really respectful, leaves space, always aware of what's going on. And I've had an experience recently of being in the back of a Lyft or an Uber, and you see the other kind. You know? And you're really like even this morning I got here, I was like almost car sick from, you know, just the way the person was driving. It's just so ungraceful. So I think it's really interesting, and I think Waymo is a good example. If you guys have had a chance, hopefully most of you have, to take a Waymo, you get a really wonderful experience because it's very safe and very respectful. I think very graceful kind of choreography that they built into that. Good. Other questions? Oh yes, go ahead.
So I'm really interested in a lot of robotic collaborations in art, and we did a play, Anka and I did a play with her way back in the day, and I think in a lot of the stuff that you're doing, it's kind of like the robot is just performing and humans are responding. It tends to not actually be like a true collaboration, and I think that's in part limitations of the technology that we have right now, the responsiveness. And I'm kind of curious what you think the pathway is there to have like true leader-follower, like collaborative interaction in these types of performances between technology and humans, rather than like technology just kind of like doing a thing and then humans taking up all of the slack of like really interacting with the technology.
The project I worked on at Google, we trained a model on my preferences. So we basically had it flock. We taught robots to flock in all these different patterns and also to respond to different kinds of human gestures and where people were located. And then we trained a model on my preferences with a whole bunch of different kind of hand-tuned features. And we were able to have the robots just improvise and be spontaneous and do unexpected things, and that it could constantly infer based on the pattern it had been in and the next pattern that was going to what it should be doing next to create a compelling performance. And so I would agree with you. I think there's been quite a bit of work in the past that's sort of like the technology in isolation, but I want to push that a little bit, sort of a step further too, which is to say that the technology is in the loop insofar as we did so many different iterations of this project, and it's like exploring how the robot moves relative to how I'm moving, and then we do another iteration based on top of that, and also from what we're inspired by with what the robot brought to the table. And so I think it's maybe what you see in an end product is also a little different than what the process looks like along the way.
I also think it's important to point out that the message here is a kind of reassurance to the public that robots are not as graceful as humans. And I think we have a really long time to go before that gap really is closed. So to your point, you know, I think as researchers, we want to convey that the motions of robots today are still relatively limited. And that's important. And it comes back to the first point I made, which is that I worry about the expectations getting so large that we've seen, and people see science fiction and others, they think, oh, this is all, you know, it's about to happen. But one of the subtexts of our project is to say, wow, there's still a huge gap between the incredible performance of a dancer like Catie and a robot. And that gap, I don't think is going to be closed that easily. Which I think is good news for human beings.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question we have time for.
This is great work, fantastic stuff. When you're dancing on the stage there, I noticed the robot looks like a robot arm. For this sort of early work, that sort of makes sense as that's part of the artistic statement, right? But as those of us who work in robotics know, there's this novelty effect thing, right? So I'm wondering what your vision is for when the novelty effect wears off. Like, what is the future of dancing robots or agents, you know, collaborating with real human artists on stage? And you know, like there's strengths and weaknesses on both sides. Have you thought about that, or some of your visions?
So I think it's important. So I've worked with, I don't know, 15 different kinds of robots in an artistic context, and I tried once to dress a robot up, and I really didn't like it, because I think that robots need to look like robots. And part of the artistic commentary is to subvert people's expectations about what that machine can do and what environment it can be in. So taking it out of a context where it's picking and placing and making it dance around as a dance partner for 8 hours is part of the artistic statement of what you're bringing to the table. And I also love, I came up with this phrase early on, kind of like constantness. I love that robots have these like high jerk motions, especially industrial ones. I love that they move qualitatively in ways that are different than how humans move. But to your question about the novelty thing, so I think really, and I would love to posit that we've gotten there, right? But I think it's very much about not highlighting, look at this cool robot doing cool robot things, but transcending the tool and saying, look at this body of knowledge or artistic statement or work that could not be created without a robot, because that is part of the message. And it's somehow perennial. It goes beyond the novelty of the tool. I think where we get stuck is if it's all about just pure entertainment and showing off how awesome the tool is. But if it's about a deeper, a broader message about a sensation that goes beyond just the capabilities of the robot, then I think the novelty factor, I'd worry about at 0.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing.
That's great, and I think it's actually really interesting, and I encourage if you get a chance to see this, because it's very meditative. When the novelty wears off, you're absolutely right. I think that wears off fairly quickly, and then it becomes something about just watching this motion and watching the interplay between the two of them. But it's surprising how long people are interested in sitting down and watching that. So it's going into a different realm than just novelty in some ways. Thanks for that question.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.